Hello everyone, my name is Angela Raquinho and the title of my special project is Faith in the System. This is my introduction and it says, what happens when the very same people who swore to protect us become the ones who harm us? Nothing. For most of us, we have been widely taught that law enforcers bear the responsibility of protecting our community. However, police misconduct have been occurring and in each of those cases, there is no justice done. Many people fall victim to this, and some even lost their lives. Even though that is the case, the system continuously refuses to hold law enforcement accountable. This leads to the negative perception of law enforcement from the public, which would then compromise them from effectively upholding their responsibilities. Knowing this, we must take action. In order to restore police legitimacy and rebuild the trust the community once had with the police, reforms regarding police accountability must be passed. Quick side note to clarify, my project does revolve around the idea of police accountability. Alright, so for the first slide, let's talk about statistics. How many people actually believe that police aren't being held accountable? Data shows that 46% of Americans believe this. That is nearly half of the Americans. Those who hold this view are generally African American, Hispanics, younger individuals, lower income individuals, and Democrats. In these graphs, it overall shows a different statistic with different groups and how they view police officers. So you can see that it shows the statistics of who say that most officers think they are above the law, who believe that police officers are honest and trustworthy, who thinks that police are trustful within local residency, and it also shows who believe that police officers are actually being held accountable for their misconduct. Institutions need legitimacy to function. A belief in the rule of law and that individuals foster their legitimacy. It is thus problematic that nearly half of all Americans and majorities of Black, Hispanics, young people, Democrats, and lower income individuals think most police officers don't believe that law applies to them. Now, it's time to justify why exactly Americans think this way towards law enforcement. I'll transition into how police accountability is working in the real world. More accurately, how police aren't being held accountable in the real world. To portray this, I will be mostly focusing on cases revolving the African American community, as they are one as they are one of the groups included in the statistics from the previous slide, and one of the group that I believe that is greatly affected with police accountability. Moving on, a case that shows how police aren't being held accountable is the case regarding Rodney King. He was an African American man who was beaten up by the LAPD. The act was captured by a camera, however, even with evidence, the charges made fail to hold officers accountable. This shows that even when evidence is clearly present, police officers aren't charged because what they are doing is apparently their job, which was clearly which was not clearly the case. They were obviously committing police brutality, but it doesn't matter. The court decided to let them go. The reasoning for this is that most people perceive that if a police officer did something, he or she was doing it for their protection or the greater good of society. So the bar of charging and convicting police officers is higher than the bar for regular citizens. So from this quote, we can understand that police officers are held in a higher standing than a regular citizen. If they've done something wrong, it would take much more to actually convict them. With them let go, bad cops continue to be around. Honestly, even when the cop has been charged, the other party doesn't really win. Let's take George Floyd's case for an example. The officer who killed him was named Derek Chauvin. Officer Chauvin was Spanish, however, prior to that event, he had already committed 18 other misconducts, but he was only convicted for one. Another case is the officers who were involved in the deaths of Tamir Rice and Antoine Rose, two young African American boys who were fatally shot by the police. The officers guilty weren't even convicted, unlike Chauvin. Instead, they were just dismissed, not even fired. Due to that, are actually able to still continue to join law enforcement, just in a different department. They are able to cleanly get away because of the fraternal order of police. What does that tell you? Even if police were found guilty, they still have a huge chance that the only punishment they'll receive is a dismissal. That's not enough punishment to atone for their sins. Too often they have not been held accountable. This lack of accountability has eroded community trust and fostered suspicion and resentment. Now that we're aware of what the problem is, it's time for a change. It's time for reform. This slide will show a list of different reforms that could be implemented in our legislature. Since it's a lot, I won't be saying them all out individually and only saying some. If you guys want to read them all, feel free to pause the video whenever you want to. So an example of a way of a reform that could promote accountability is the establishment of an independent special investigator or prosecutor office responsible for investigating instances where police have seriously injured or killed civilians. Another could be inclusion of victim advocate statements by survivors of police violence, including family members of individuals who are victims of police violence during grand jury hearings. Another example could be requiring the usage of body-worn cameras with applicable privacy protections, including creating protocols that could indicate when cameras must be activated and guarding against the tampering of footage. Lastly, we could also implement the idea of requiring police departments to develop and publicly report a strategy and timeline for achieving a representative proportion of officers who are women and people of color through outreach, recruitment, and changes to department practices. Out, out of all these ideas, we don't have to use them all. We could start with only using a few or even one, because even with one reform, we would be one step closer in reforming our law enforcement for the better. Once that happens, we will be able to restore police legitimacy and rebuild the trust the community once had with the police. And that is all what I have for my presentation. Thank you. These are my three sources. The first source is used in the statistics slide, the second source is used in the police accountability slide, and the third source is used in the time for change slide. For the first source, I chose that source because it provided different statistics regarding how the public view police accountability, and it had a diverse range of the public perception, and it was reflected in the numbers. As for the second source, I chose this source because it focused on the African American community who have been greatly affected by police brutality. It briefly explained why police officers take so long to be charged and why those who are guilty still carry their badge. It also proposes reforms to change police accountability at the end of the article. As for the third source, I chose that source because it was an overview of the positive effects of holding police accountable for their misconduct. It focuses on the different methods that can be used to hold police accountable, and lastly, it proposes multiple ways to promote accountability for local, state, and legislatures, which was seen in the Last slide, time for change.